Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov Chess Channel and welcome back to the World Rapid Chess Championship in 2021. We're now already in the round 9 of the super event and we're following now an epic battle between Magnus Carlsen and Jan-Krzysztof Duda. Both of them before the round 9 and of course in 8 rounds so far had 6.5 points on the scoreboard, which meant that they were in the lead, and the winner of this very important match will probably have great chances in order to win this very prestigious tournament. So let's check out now what happened. Again, Magnus Carlsen had, I think, a little bit luck because he played again against a direct rival with the white pieces. He also played his game against Alireza Firouzja with the white pieces, but you know Magnus Carlsen, he plays the game with the black pieces, with the white pieces the same. So he's a strong also player, of course, with the black pieces, so it doesn't matter. But I think Duda or maybe Alireza Firouzja would love to play their game against such a strong opponent with the white pieces. So that's why, in my opinion, it was a slightly advantage here again for Magnus Carlsen. So let's check out now what happens. So Magnus opened with the move e4. We have c5 by Duda, knight to f3. So the Sicilian, and now we have the Nimzovich variation of the Sicilian, which is, I think, one of the most aggressive and the most provocative openings, because you don't want to tolerate this knight on f6, because the preparation of the move knight to f6 is of course the move d5. So that's why you see black is not touching any pawns in the center, hopes that white goes into this particular line, which Magnus Carlsen of course did. We have now the move knight to e5, but now after move knight to d5, okay, the most important thing to recognize here is that white has a space advantage on the 5th rank, but the pawn on e5 is a little bit exposed. Now in the continuation of the game, black will find a way, I think, to break the position with the move d6. e6 is also an opportunity. So as I said, sometimes in chess your pawn can be a huge advantage, but sometimes also this advanced pawn can be a disadvantage. If of course black somehow catches the pawn, then white is in serious positional problems. So here for move knight to d5, we have knight to c3, knight takes c3, and now d takes c3. It's again one of the rare cases where you're basically taking away from the center. Most of the time we're taking here towards the center with b takes c3. Now with the move d takes c3, we're breaking a little bit the principles in chess, but with a clear idea. What we're trying to do is open the d file, and what we are trying to do is, after potential knight to c6 and after h4, which Magnus Carlsen did, you see Magnus Carlsen creates an immediate flank attack, and what we're trying to do is have a great control here of the d5 square. But also, if you play, for instance, the move e6, then we want to have a further control of the d6 square. So even if you try, let's see, maybe d6, then we can take e takes d6, and after here e takes d6, we can immediately attack, or we can play a beautiful blockade here with the move bishop to c4 and never ever allow this pawn to get advanced on d5. So then in the long run, maybe black could have this backward pawn as a main weakness. So that's why I liked here really Magnus Carlsen's choice to go immediately with the move h4, because this advanced pawn is on the king side. So that's why we should attack the king side. This pawn is coordinated to this side of the board, so that's why I liked immediately Magnus Carlsen's choice to play the move h4. And this move h4 is actually already a theoretical novelty, so this position has never been reached in chess history. At least I'm not seeing any games in the database in this particular line. So after move h4, we have now this move e6, and now bishop to f4. Magnus is controlling now the d file very well. The d6 square is paralyzed, the d5 is also a little bit paralyzed. So here, so far, already a great advantage for the world champion Magnus Carlsen. So we have now queen to c7, queen to d2, we have now h6, and now bishop to d3 here by Magnus Carlsen. You have to, of course, develop your minor pieces further. So b6, we have bishop to e4. Great path here by the bishop, because this bishop can of course attack also the knight on b5, but actually it doesn't bring you anything. What we're trying to do is compete with this bishop, because here when the bishop comes on b7, then it becomes actually the best minor piece of blacks. So that's why Magnus sensed immediately that this bishop on b7 could be a long run beautiful piece. So that's why he prevented this idea with the move bishop to d3 and followed with bishop to e4. Look at this setup now by Magnus Carlsen. Beautiful setup with the opportunities to queenside castle, then go even g4, g5. And what black probably will never do in this particular position is castle kingside, because if you castle now kingside, I think you're running into simply white's attack. There is simply not a good way how black should make progress here, how black should prevent this g4 g5 idea. So that's why I think castle kingside would be simply a suicide already here for black. So great opening theory here by the world champion Magnus Carlsen. We're now in the move 10 and it's already a +1 evaluation here for white, which is really incredible. In top grandmaster level you don't see so many times that player gets in such a huge advantage in an early stage of the game. So far, as I said, great theory by Magnus. We have bishop to b7, now c4. c4 is also a great move, because if you don't play c4, let's see, we're playing maybe something like h5, we continuing further progress, then I think with move b5 black could also find good opportunities to create a queenside flank attack here with maybe c4 or maybe b4. So black has also some beautiful opportunities. So that's why c4, again, a beautiful move, a paralyzing move here by the world champion. You see now Magnus is basically controlling now the whole board. The black pieces are simply pushed away, too passive now, and now Magnus, what Magnus needs to do is simply castle and occupy simply the very open here d file. So here in the continuation, knight to a5, we have bishop to b7, and now comes one of the critical moments of the game here. Jan-Krzysztof Duda took with the knight, but the better idea is to play queen to b7, because at least when you're staying with the move knight to a5 here, then at least you're attacking the c4 pawn, and now basically white is pretty much forced to do something. You can play maybe queen to e2, then a6, maybe again to make progress with the move b5, and then for potential a4, bishop to e7. Maybe this could be a rook lift, because many times when you advance the pawn like this, the rook follows the pawn and then creates a very important space advantage, and also creates maybe an attack. But here I think this is defendable again for black, because black can get out of this tactical mess and go simply queenside castling. So as I said, kingside castling would be suicide, queenside castling would be maybe a good positional idea. But at least, as I said, with the move knight to a5, we are attacking the c4 pawn. So here, in my opinion, after move bishop to b7, with the move knight to b7, you see it gave here Magnus Carlsen extra tempo. Here Magnus doesn't have to defend the pawn anymore, and he has now the opportunity to secure the king by queenside castling, which Magnus Carlsen of course did. So we have here queen to c6, and now Magnus makes, I think, a little bit of an inaccuracy. He probably didn't realize what Jan-Krzysztof Duda idea was. Jan-Krzysztof Duda idea was to go here queen to e4 and then hide with the queen maybe here to g6, maybe even to h7 if it's necessary, and then to go again queenside castling. Here Magnus played queen to c3. He should have prevented this queen to e4 move. Here in the continuation we have bishop to e7, and again rook to d3. A better idea is simply go rook to e1, but it's rapid chess, of course. Magnus cannot play the game like Stockfish engine. I'm using the Stockfish engine at home, and Stockfish is suggesting me better moves, of course, but we should really consider why is it better here to play the move rook to e1. The idea is not a tactical idea. The idea about this move rook to e1 is a prophylactic idea, because you're not allowing this move queen to e4, then queen to f5 or queen to g6. So the queen here on c6 is simply not good. So that's why you should prevent it. You should paralyze the queen further. After move rook to d3 here, it was Jan-Krzysztof Duda that get an extra tempo. Magnus had to defend the position with the move g3, and now again this idea knight to a5. So you see, by playing the move rook to d3, basically Magnus Carlsen invited here Jan-Krzysztof Duda to go and attack the weak pawn on c4. So here we have rook from h to d1 attacking the d7, so you don't have time so far to take, because also you lose the d7 pawn. So that's why rook to d8, and now knight to d2 attacking the queen, queen to f5, and now rook to f3. There is no the threat of a discovered attack, but Jan-Krzysztof Duda, we have to really say it, is a great tactician, is a great attacker, and he found really now a beautiful simplification idea. Many of us, I think, would be scared facing maybe the rook against the queen like this, but not Jan-Krzysztof Duda. He stopped, he was, I think, here very confident in his abilities to calculate everything. He stopped the pace a little bit of the game, stayed with the queen on f5, and found beautiful tactic. He found now the move knight to c6, and okay, Magnus takes bishop to h6, but now Duda has this one. Knight to d4 comes with the counter attack against the rook on f3, and also with the threat of a fork on e2. This was Duda's calculation. Beautiful tactics now in the middle game stage. We have to again say played. This is rapid chess. Many of us would chicken and the retreat with the queen, but not Duda. He played now brilliant counterattack with knight to d4. We have queen to d4, rook queen to f3, knight to f3, and now after c takes d4, this was the pretty much forced tactical sequence. It was Magnus Carlsen that took now the pawn on g7, but now after rook to h7, you have to bring here the bishop on f6. After bishop to f6, e takes f6, and here after rook to h6, Magnus Carlsen took the pawn on d4, but also Duda took the pawn on f6. And let's stop and evaluate the position. Magnus Carlsen has, of course, the knight and 2 pawns for the rook, which is solid compensation. It's the evaluation is pretty much equal. But from a human's perspective, I think this is really hard to play for the rooks. We have to really say it because there's simply too many pawns on the board. That's the main issue, I think, here. Because maybe if it would be, I don't know, maybe 4 pawns and against 2 pawns, and maybe 2 rooks against the rook and a knight on the board, then the rooks would be much better. But with so many pawns, you see there are still 7 pawns by Magnus Carlsen on the board. It's really hard for white to find some path for the rook. That's, I think, the main issue here. Too many pawns are simply on the board, because if maybe one side would be open, then the rook could come somehow into the game. Then the rook could be maybe doubled on the second rank, maybe even on the first rank somehow. So maybe you can trade off one rook for another rook of Magnus Carlsen, simplify the game, go into an endgame. But here, with so many pawns, Magnus Carlsen can play actually a blockade. Here, after move f4, you see he's not allowing any rook moves. He's not allowing his opponent's rook to come on his side on the board. That's the beauty of having so many pawns on the board. So here, king to e7, rook to d3, rook to c8, and now b3, fixing and everything. We have rook to g6, knight to e2, protecting this pawn, and now after rook to g8, here Magnus Carlsen goes towards the center, which is of course a normal idea. He wants now to have a great protection of the g3, which is basically this most important pawn. It's a backward pawn, it's a cornerstone pawn. If you lose the pawn, you will probably lose the game, so that's why Magnus includes a new defender and try to protect the g3 pawn. So we have now d6, a4, we have now e5, and now rook to f3, we have rook to g4. What Duda is hoping for, let's see, maybe a bad move here for white. If you play, for instance, something like c3, then you get e takes f4. And now, if you take with the rook, then we're trading off simply more material. If you take with the knight, then you lose with the pawn. And if you take with the pawn, then the h4 pawn is a weakness. So that was Duda's preparation here. Beautiful also tactical idea by the Polish grandmaster. So here, after move king to e3 was played, so you have to protect further your position. Here in the continuation, we have king to e6, king to f2, knight, rook to g7, and now rook to e3. We have king to f5, rook to d3, attacking the pawn, this weak pawn on d6. We have now king to e6, and now rook to d5 here by Duda, because now this idea e takes f4 is not working, because you get knight to f4, and this move, of course, comes with a check. So here, after move rook to d5, we have now rook to g8, and now king to f3. This is the position that Magnus Carlsen wanted to get. He's having now his king very active. At least his king is centralized, and now he can play maybe much more freely with this rook, or maybe with this knight. So here in the continuation, a6 was played by Duda. He's preparing now a queenside maybe attack with the move b5. At least he's trying somehow to open the position. So after the move a6 here, Magnus Carlsen stepped back with the rook to d1. He probably wanted to play some perpetuals, and this game should probably end in a draw. But now Jan-Krzysztof Duda started to play a couple of inaccuracies, even some mistakes. Here he played king to e7. A better idea is here to play simply f5. This move would paralyze at least the position for a while. And now in the continuation, we can even try the move e4 here. So there's no way for white to make progress here, although you have this pass pawn here on the sorry about that. Sorry, my son came into the room where we stopped. As we said, f5 probably would have been a better idea, simply blocking out the position. Then, as we said, e4 would be a much better continuation. There's no progress here, as we said, with the h-pawn, because you don't have support. So as we said, probably this should end in a draw. But suddenly here king to e7 was played by Duda, and this allows now Magnus Carlsen to play the move f5. You see, Magnus is making progress, and now again a new mistake here by Jan-Krzysztof Duda. He played now rook to g7, which gives, I think, here Magnus Carlsen a pleasant game, because the problem is now the d6 is sort of a pawn that you don't want to lose. If you lose this pawn, then the rook comes into the game. So a better idea after move f5 is simply to paralyze the position further, and we're waiting now. Black has to wait now. Black doesn't have to attack the position, but after move here rook to g7, in the continuation Magnus found this idea, rook to d5, we have king to f6, although probably here, as we said, f6 is a perfect move, king to f6, and then rook to d6 grabs all of the pawns. And if you maybe even take one of all of these pawns, you have a 4 versus 1 pawn majority. So this is then completely winning endgame. So, but Magnus played rook to d5. After king to f6, we have rook to d6. Anyway, we have king to f5, rook takes b6, rook to g6, and now a5. Again, a beautiful move here by Magnus Carlsen. Rook to d8. We have now g4, rook to g4, but now knight to g3, kicking away the rook from the defense. You have to take. We have knight takes g3, and now after rook takes knight, we have king to g3, and now after e4, rook takes a6 here by Magnus Carlsen. You see, now we have a 4 pawn storm here on the queen side. Okay, you have this passer, but it's simply too slow. Here in the continuation, king to e5. Now Magnus Carlsen played rook to b6, rook to g8, king to f2, f5. Now we have a6, king to f4, rook to e6 here by Magnus Carlsen, rook to g7, c5. We have rook to d7, and now rook to d6. Magnus Carlsen is of course trying to simplify the game by trading off some rooks. Rook to g7, now the rook to d4. This is also very important, at least temporarily blocking the further progress of the pawn here on the e file. King to e5, we have rook to a4, getting behind the pawn. Very important move. F4. Now comes this idea, a7, e3, king to f1. We have king to d5. In this position, Jan-Krzysztof Duda resigned, because this move a8 comes with the promotion and also with a direct check against the king. So that's why it was game over. So what to say? Again, beautiful endgame technique by the world champion Magnus Carlsen. I'm not sure what's going on with this, with his opponents when they're playing the endgame against Magnus. They have always drawish lines, even some winning lines. They're simply missing their opportunities here. Jan-Krzysztof Duda should have played a repetition with the rooks, and he could have had the draw. But okay, this is the world champion Magnus Carlsen. This is simply his game, sort of. When he's given a chance, he'll take the chance and will destroy you in an endgame like this. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Sorry about some messed up things that I did in the video. My son came into the room. It's very hard sometimes for me to organize everything, family life and recording some videos. I hope you don't mind. And if you want to see more games that we have analyzed before, check out my coverage of the World Rapid Chess Championship so far. Here's the link of our playlist, and if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.